Hi, welcome back. We are going to dive into boundaries. And now that we understand a little bit more about the gardens and how the gardens come into play, it's much clearer to understand boundaries. So if you think back to the image that I had up with the Venn diagram, the boundaries are very clear, and that's not always the case in our life. I understand that. But once you start seeing what's yours, what's mine, what's theirs, what's ours, it makes boundary setting a little bit more clear. And let's be honest, we all have let our boundaries slip many, many times. And that leads to a lot of winter obstacles, right? I mean, if we let people in or take advantage of us or we overgive, that definitely is a sign of soft boundaries. So they don't have to be harsh, they don't have to be rude, they don't have to be severe, but they need to be clear. So in our workbook, we have a page about boundaries, of course. And so when we look at boundaries, I want you to think about a time in which you felt wronged or resentful or bitter or a little bit irritated at yourself or at someone else. That's typically where the sign of a weak boundary lives. When we feel resentful, that's a very clear-cut sign that our boundary was weak in some area and we need to set firmer boundaries. Now that might be with your child, that might be with somebody else in your life, but right now think about your relationship to your child and the boundaries that you need to set with them. So when we create a new boundary, we really start from a place of what we want the outcome to be, right? Because if we believe in the outcome, if we know what we're looking to have at the end, it's very easy for us to say, I'm sorry, that doesn't work for me, because the boundary is set and you believe in it. So you are more likely to enforce the boundary than if it's something you feel uncomfortable about in the first place. So think about an example in your life, and I'll walk you through an example here so that you can see what does it look like with your kids, because we all know professional boundaries or like personal space boundaries with strangers. If you've ever been to a party and someone's getting a little too close, that's definitely a clear sign of boundaries. But with your kids, it always gets a little bit murky because they consume you in such a unique and often unexpected way. So in the example in our book, we're going to look at this family who says their kids like to bake, but they are leaving the kitchen in a huge mess. So that's a moment in which this parent feels very resentful, right? That she has allowed her children to bake, and she feels taken advantage of because they come in like a whirlwind, tornado the whole kitchen, have their cookies and walk away. And so that's a perfect opportunity to set a boundary. So creating a rule is to support the outcome that you want to have. The outcome is she wants a clean kitchen. She wants to be able to come to the kitchen and start the next project in the kitchen, whether that's lunch, it's breakfast, it's dinner, it's, whatever project she has going on, and she doesn't want to have to tackle their mess first. So the rule is we clean up after ourselves. And this is typically a rule for most families. It's not always enforced. And so in this case, we are going to enforce it, right? We want to set this boundary around this particular activity. And so the expectation is that when your child or your children come to you and say, oh my gosh, we would love to bake this thing. We found these new muffins or these cookies or these scones. You're gonna love them, Mom. We're gonna bake that. The expectation is that they commit to cleaning up before they even start, right? They need to commit to that. And depending on the age of your child, that commitment could just be a verbal commitment if they stand by their word, or it might actually be something you write out. It might need to be that for some kids because either they forget or they find loopholes. So write it out if that's what's required. But the expectation is that we commit to cleaning up before we start baking makes it very clear that if they are not interested in cleaning the mess, they cannot start, right? So that just stops it right there. When they're ready to commit to cleaning, they're welcome to come and bake. It really puts the power back on their shoulders. The outcome, of course, is that the space is clean and ready for the next person to use. That might be any person doing anything in the kitchen. It needs to be ready and ready for that person, which means the counters are wiped, the floors are swept, the surfaces are clean, the dishes are washed. You get to define what that is. And everybody's kitchen is different. Everybody's idea of clean is different. So define that for yourself. But really, that's the communication point with your children when you're setting boundaries. And the consequences, in this case, it's fairly simple. You will not be able to bake for a set period of time. This parent had 1 week. You are not able to bake for 1 week if you can't follow through on cleaning up after you're done baking. Now, if it is a bigger rule, if it's a bigger boundary, that timeline might be longer, right? If you have a child who's driving and they do something you deem as unsafe and they break the rule, if they don't follow the rule, the consequence could be much longer, right? So you define for yourself and for your family what that is, but it really depends on the circumstances. Obviously, somebody driving has a very different whole set of contexts than, you know, a 6-year-old who doesn't pick up his toys, right? Very different context. So you know your whole picture, you know your family. Think about a time in which you wanted to set a boundary and you didn't know how. And try this formula. Understand what you want the rule to be. What is it that you want at the end of it? What is your expectation for them to follow? And then at the end of it, what is it you want to have? What happens when they don't follow the rule? What happens when they cross the boundary and do not live up to their side of the bargain? That's the consequence. It should be natural. It should be an extension. If you are using this parent's example of baking, you wouldn't then say, I will take your phone for 3 weeks, because a phone has nothing to do with baking, right? So for the consequence to make sense, for the consequence to fit the aberration of the issue, it really needs to be in the same vein, in the same family as the rule that was broken, right? So setting consequences really should be a natural extension of the activity where the rule was set. Pulling out random things, you know, no video games, you lose your allowance, you know, no friends for a month, feels very haphazard. It feels very disjointed for a child because they don't know if they want to break that boundary. Sometimes they do. Sometimes children will be like, you know what, actually, I'm fine not baking for a week because I really want to make these cookies and I don't care about the mess that I make. And if I don't bake for a week, I'll get over it, right? And so then you need to understand the nuances of your family differently. If they don't think the price is high enough and they're like, I'm going to break the rule intentionally and I'll leave my mom or my dad to clean up the mess because I know next week I can do it again, then you need to tweak your formula. It really should be something where they have to stop and be denied, you know, a denial of service. You don't get to bake because you didn't take care of our kitchen, right? For this family, 1 week was plenty. This child was feeling it because they baked every day. They baked something every day. So a week was a very long time. If you have a child who bakes once a month, they're not even going to notice that they didn't bake for a week. So it really needs to be an extension of the activity, and the consequence needs to fit the time that makes sense for the activity and the child. Anyways, I hope you're able to set some boundaries and really dig into those places where you feel disempowered, because that's often a place where you could use a rule, where there could be a discussion and a conversation with your kids about, we're going to do this differently now, because when you do A, I feel B, and that makes me feel bad. B for bad. And we don't want that. So we're going to try this new system, and then you introduce what the rule is. It should generally fit in your family rule area. It should not necessarily be 50 rules from all over the place. Nobody can keep track of that. So we clean up after ourselves is a pretty generic rule that fits many places in most families. Is it the bathroom after their shower or their bath? Is it bringing in dirty boots after the rainstorm? We clean up after ourselves is pretty generic. So that fits fine, right? Think of it that way. Don't get so specific that then they can find loopholes, because they love that. It's kind of a game, actually. Anyways, best of luck setting some boundaries, and we will talk to you in the next unit.